So the focus of this conversation is sisters. Hi, I'm Dr. Francis, a world-renowned wildlife nutritionist. You may not have heard of me, but your baby giraffe sure has. So let's talk about carbohydrates in your pet's food. Do they need it or do they not need it? We'll talk about that later today. Ooh, I'm a little baby. It's funny when I have this conversation with people because there seems to be three different kinds of people. The first think that carbs are absolutely fine. The second thinks that carbs are the devil, they're awful, but they don't know where to find it. The third think that carbs are bad, but maybe they're okay in small amounts. So out of these three, which are you? Well, to be clear, carbohydrates are a big family of nutrients. So when I just say carbohydrates, it doesn't give you a lot of information because there are sugars, there's starches, and there's fibers. Technically, all of these are carbohydrates, but what I mean in this video are soluble carbohydrates. So the focus of this conversation is sugars and starches. Those are the ones that we will focus on because fiber is a whole different conversation, and we all know that some fiber is good for dogs and cats. There's very little debate on that. So let's focus on a much hotter topic, sugars and starches. So when I say carbs, those are the ones I mean. Let's back up a minute. Hold on. How many carbohydrates do dogs and cats actually need to survive? According to AFCO, the internationally recognized standard for nutrient requirements for dogs and cats, how many carbs does a dog or cat need? The answer? 0. None. None. It is not listed anywhere. And even if you look at the National Research Council papers and books on nutrient recommendations for pet dogs and cats, carbohydrates are not listed. There is no requirement for carbohydrates. Now, just because there's no requirement doesn't necessarily mean that it's not a good thing. So we can still explore what is the point of carbohydrates, and is it good, is it bad, or maybe it's only good in small amounts. Do dogs and cats even like carbohydrates? Well, there's this amazing study that looked at domestic dogs, domestic cats, and then wolves, and then forest cats. And it gave them all the different choices of food. So it gave them high protein, high fat, high carbohydrate diets. And it let them choose which food that they wanted to eat in which proportion. And then they repeated this tons of times with every animal. And they found that the dogs and cats were selecting very specific amounts of protein and fat. And carbohydrates was kind of just left there. They were not selected for at all. So the evolutionary drive that's inside dogs and cats is for protein and fat. Carbohydrates doesn't even factor into their evolutionary adaptations. Now, yes, it's true that through domestication, 33,000 years ago, our domestic dogs have adapted to be a little bit better at digesting carbohydrates like sugars and starches. But again, just because they can do it, doesn't mean that they thrive on it. Or was that an adaptation that just prevented them from dying because that's all they had to eat were human scraps, a lot of that being grains. So even if we put a very generous estimation on the amount of carbohydrates that dogs would eat as they were being domesticated, maybe we say 15-20%, right? 20% is being very generous. Well, everyday dog and cat food, we're talking about kibble or canned food, the carbohydrate content of whatever you're currently feeding is between 30 and 74%. Every brand is different. Some will say low carb, but the lowest that I've ever seen is 30%, which is definitely lower than 74, but it's still much higher than 15 or 20, which is what you'll be aiming for the total diet. So once again, we're wondering, well, why are carbs even being found in these foods? Well, it's not a surprise when you consider the fact that most kibble and canned food companies are owned by cereal companies. So they have lots of access to affordable and shelf-stable grains like rice, wheat, and oats. So it's very convenient and affordable for them to use those ingredients. And at the same time, when they're making kibble, the whole process of being extruded requires carbohydrates to bind the kibble together. There needs to be some amount of carbohydrates in the kibble even to make it stick. But does that really mean you need 74%? At this point, the reasons for using a lot of carbohydrates seem to be more about convenience and profit, more than for the health of your dog or cat. In the right amounts, carbohydrates can be useful, sure. If you're looking at whole grains like brown rice or quinoa or kamut, things like that, they do have a lot of minerals. But once you're using this very, very stripped down white rice or wheat, then you're losing a lot of the things that would make it beneficial in the first place. And again, it doesn't mean that we need 74% of these grains in the diet. Maybe reduce it down to 5 or 10%, or just a little sprinkle. If you calculate the nutrients in whatever diet you're currently feeding, whatever home recipe you're currently doing, that will really help you identify the right amount of grains that you need, if you need them at all. Look, kibble and canned food is economical, it's shelf stable, it's convenient, right? So if you're feeding that to your dog and cat and they like the taste, you're happy with it, by all means, don't stop just on my behalf. But what I would strongly suggest is that you replace a proportion of these kibbles or canned food with a whole food ingredient, something that's higher in protein and digestible fats and little to no carbs. So maybe you want to take out 20% of these kibble and then replace them with nice quality, gently cooked meat like pork or fish or even eggs. Those are great additions. And your pet will probably love that addition as well. And you can even save another 10% and replace that with some veggies like leafy, green vegetables, or maybe even fruits like berries. Doing this will help to increase the digestibility of the protein and the fats in the kibble, and at the same time will help to replace some of those carbohydrates with other things that are much, much better for your dog and cat's digestive system and metabolism overall. So again, now that we've talked about carbohydrates, if someone's feeding a little bit of brown rice, don't freak out and don't attack them, because you need to look at the diet as the sum of its parts. Maybe a little bit of brown rice or a little bit of quinoa actually helps to balance out the minerals and the vitamins that are found in the entire diet. So remember that the ingredients are important as the sum of its parts. So when you look at the entire diet, even if it's just a little bit of brown rice, a little bit of grains, maybe that helps to make sure that all the nutrients are accounted for and present in the diet. So no ingredient is inherently bad or good. It really depends on how does it fit in with all the other ingredients in the diet. So I hope this video helped make you think about carbohydrates a little bit and be a little bit nicer to the people who feed a little bit of brown rice. But if they feed a lot of brown rice, get out of here. I'm kidding. Come back and keep watching and learn more and feed less rice. Hope you enjoyed this video. Subscribe, like, follow us on Instagram and TikTok because I'm cool. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye.